Remember that time when Shockwave got punched in the eye by Elita? I felt so bad for that dude. He needs some well-deserved rest after what he went through in Transformers 1. And he could get some of that rest with the help of today's sponsor, Manta Sleep, and their awesome sleep masks, which offer comfortable experiences when winding down for bed. There's quite a few models to choose from, but I've been using the Sleep Mask Pro. Now, my wife actually struggles with sleeping at night, and when she tried this mask out, it really helped her wind down and get some much-needed rest. I mean, just imagine having to listen to me record these videos all night long. It's crazy. Manta Sleep makes the best sleep masks in the world. Check out Manta Sleep via the link in my description, and make sure to use my code DELTA10 for 10% off your order. I've always found it so interesting that some of my best performing videos on my channel have been centered around Elita-1. For the most part, I cover the Skybound comic series from Transformers, where her character has divided many fans due to her actions. And while we will discuss that a bit today, we're here to fully break down her character from Transformers 1. But just like my other two essays for the film, we first need to take a look back at where Elita came from to understand more fully who she is in this film. Elita first appeared in the Generation 1 cartoon around 1985. For the most part, she primarily serves as the girlfriend to Orion Pax, in flashbacks before the height of the Cybertronian War. After his rebirth, Elita ends up staying on Cybertron and continuing the war while Optimus travels to Earth aboard the Ark. And that's about it for the G1 cartoon. During the time period, I think it's safe to say that the creators of the show didn't have much focus on female characters.
Female Autobots. I thought they were extinct.
Transformers was, generally speaking, seen as a franchise for boys, as gender-coding toys was standard practice then, and somewhat still is to this day. But this video is not a dive into the aspects of these toys are for boys and these toys are for girls, but I think we can all agree that in a general statement, Transformers, at that time, wasn't primarily targeting girls and their interests just yet. Elita didn't have much more time in the spotlight until her appearance in 2015's Windblade comic from the IDW Comics series. She does appear in other media before this, like Transformers Animated, but I feel that that character should be explored in a Black Arachnia video, as that's the majority of her character from that continuity. Chris McFeely does a much better job than I do when it comes to covering a character's full history. My point being, her main depictions were really rooted in Generation 1, the IDW comics, and the War for Cybertron trilogy. And don't worry, we will get to the Skybound depictions as promised later in this video. And as for you Earthspark fans, I'm aware she is in the show, but I'm sorry, I still have yet to watch it. So, I'm not very equipped to speak on her character in that show, but don't worry, it is on my watch list for this new year, I promise. So Elita has been popping up in more and more Transformers media as of late, and so when it was announced that she would be in Transformers 1, I was pretty sure I had her character figured out for the movie. She would probably be playing the same old love interest for Optimus Prime, who she has a falling out with over war tactics and efficiencies or something. Then we learned the film would take place before the war, and that Elita would be voiced by Scarlett Johansson. At this point, I had shifted my theories as to her character and her role in the film, and for the most part, I think I was decently accurate as to what we would get in the film. Elita-1 is not the main character for Transformers 1, and so there's less to discuss when covering the events of the film. However, of the two side characters, I do think that she holds the most weight in the story. Sorry, B, but your video got voted to be last in this series. Elita is introduced as a no-nonsense cogless bot captain of Energon miners that has a perfect work record. She runs a tight ship, and nothing happens in the mine without her knowing. Elita is the representation of falling in line and getting the work done. Rules are rules, and they are meant to be followed. After all, following the rules and doing hard work will eventually get you promoted. That is, until someone makes a mistake. I really want to point out that in the film, it's Wheeljack who discovers the unstable vein of Energon in the mines, while in the script of the film, it states that Jazz is the one who starts the collapse. So please, Comet and Cam, make a video pitting these two against each other for workplace OSHA violations. I really need to see who is ultimately responsible for this. As Orion and D16 escape the collapsing mine with Jazz in hand, Elita commands the two to leave him behind. And I've heard a lot of people slam her for this, saying she's objectively a horrible person by essentially signing Jazz's death warrant. And I don't fully agree here. Is it tragic that Jazz is going to get left behind? Yes, absolutely. But from a manager's standpoint, the primary goal should be to evacuate everyone out of the mine safely and quickly in order to minimize casualties. And that's the issue here. From a manager's point of view, that's what Elita is here. A manager. There's a huge difference between being a manager and a leader. Managers tell their people what to do, how to do it, and when to stop doing it, while a leader allows their team to grow and take responsibility for their respective work areas. Now, Elita isn't a bad person per se, she's simply following along with the system that she lives in. And I think that we can say her relaxing on her work output in order to foster a better relationship with her subordinates won't get her any closer to the promotion she so desperately wants. Cybertron's mining scene is fully based on results, not work morale, and so managers are all that can thrive in the system. So Elita is doing her job to the best of her ability, and to the rules set in place by authority. Everything is going perfectly, until Orion messes things up for her. Understandably, she's pretty upset that Orion is not following protocol. He does the morally right thing to save Jazz, but the system in place will not see it that way. It only sees the results, and a collapsed energon mine yields no results.
Told you to evacuate.
I did, eventually.
If I get fired because of you...
Oh, please. They're not gonna fire you.
Elita-1, you're fired.
What?
Now, another aspect about leadership that we need to understand is that you are responsible for your team. When one of your team members messes up, they are to blame. Yes, they made the mistake, but ultimately as a leader, you bear the responsibility of the mistake. You may not have made the error yourself, but a good leader accepts the burden of authority in this way. Elita, being a manager and not a leader, is both literal and metaphorical in this moment. Is Orion at fault? What about Wheeljack? Or Jazz? In the end, it doesn't entirely matter, as just in the real world, the system in place often points the finger quickly in order to fix the issue. I'm not saying that Elita's firing is justified, but it is an important moment for her character, as she doesn't yet understand the difference between being a manager and a leader. She doesn't yet understand that the system she lives in is not working correctly. A good leader takes the fall for their people, and works to do better and correct the mistakes internally. A manager, when faced with an issue, immediately blames someone else. Again, this is all Elita knows, because this is how the world works. At least, that's how it works for now. Now demoted to waste management, it's interesting that we see Elita working during the Iacon 5000 race, as Sentinel has declared it a holiday for all bots, cogged and cogless. All shifts are off work. I think this just goes to show us that even when granted an opportunity to rest, Elita's iron will continues as she works through this holiday. We all know someone who is so obsessed with work that they can do this, and it's not a bad trait, but it can be misplaced. At this point in the story, Elita has emptied herself into her work, and that's all she is, a worker. Her undeniable skills and sharp mind when on the job could be used in better areas, but again, the system has put her in a place of menial work, just like it has for our other protagonists. Elita holds a grudge though, something else strong leaders must work to overcome. She sees Orion and D16 on the trains headed to the surface, and realizes that she might be able to buy herself extra favor by turning them in. It's a win-win situation. She gets a promotion, and she gets back at the bot who ruined her career. Again, a poor manager mindset, not leadership. But this plan falls apart, as she's too late to escape the calamity of these two cogless brothers, and she's trapped to go along with their insane plan to rediscover the matrix of leadership and restore Cybertron to its former glory. Elita immediately takes command of the troop following the train crash in order to minimize the collateral damage, just like she tried to do in the mine. In this moment, she lacks the humility she will soon find from the ever-obnoxious Orion, and so she uses her strong-willed nature as her ticket to heading up the lead.
I'm gonna need you to talk less.
Elita does have screen time in between this moment and the aftermath of Arachnid's surprise attack on the High Guard, but I really want to skip to that moment so that we can see her eventual change in nature. Elita, following the attack, is humbled by Orion's honesty in this moment of failure. She's still the hardened worker she was back in the mines, but through her journey with the other three protagonists, she's started to realize the difference between being a manager and being a leader. She still has some growing to do, as we see when she starts her prep talk with Orion.
Are you listening? I'm better than you.
Yeah, okay, I'm hearing you.
But she does recognize that Orion has something she doesn't: optimism. Working her entire life for a system that cared little, if at all, for her own growth, Elita sees that following protocol and barking orders out is not the way to achieve long-term success.
And I blast you back to eye! Oh, she punched me in my eye!
Everyone shut up! All of you! Listen to him!
She can manage others pretty well, tell them what to do and how to do it, but she sees the potential in Orion. The potential to be more than just a captain over some miners. Now, that doesn't mean that we've done a whole 180 for her character. She's still somewhat the same Elita we knew from the start of the film, evident by how she commands the crowd. But now, filled with a renewed sense of purpose, Elita takes control of an Energon train and leads her fellow Cybertronians into battle. She still gives out commands, but no longer is it for her own self-interest, but for the goals of the many. Later, after defeating Arachnid and witnessing the birth of Megatron, Elita once again displays her newfound responsibilities over the lives of others when trying to stop Megatron's murderous spree. The old Elita would not have stepped in. After all, it would have jeopardized her place in the system. But now, she has stepped up to be more than just a manager. She's stepping up to be a true leader. So, as I promised, we need to talk about Elita's appearance in the Skybound comics. Now, I've already done a video on her, but I want to use Daniel Warren Johnson's depiction as a way to better understand the film's characterization. In the Skybound comics, Elita is left on Cybertron while Optimus departs for Earth, leaving her as the sole leader for the Autobots. Because of this, and some other undiscovered events at the time of this recording, Elita holds strong resentment against Optimus and his fellow Autobots on Earth. This resentment leads to desperation, which leads to a rift that tears the two apart. In issue 12 of the comic, Elita reveals that she is willing to use Decepticon technology to bleed Earth dry of its natural resources in order to fuel Cybertron. This aspect of the character has caused so much arguing in the community, and I, for one, am actually kind of happy about that. Good characters should divide fans and spark conversation. There's nothing worse than a character who is so stock standard that there is nothing to talk about. It's boring, it's unflavored, it's uninspired. But Elita, in this comic series, is a character that people love to hate, and that is the mark of true character work. Skybound Elita is a warrior at heart. Jaded and broken by years of battle, her only goal is to survive. Nothing will stand in her way, not even Optimus Prime. I fully believe that this take on Elita is mostly inspired by her appearance in the War for Cybertron trilogy, where she is played off similarly, but in my opinion, not executed as well as the comic. So how do we use Skybound Elita to help us explain Transformers 1 Elita? Well, I think we can make a pretty easy comparison when looking at the two styles of leadership that they represent. As we talked about earlier, there's managing and there's leading. But even with these two categories, there are many shades of color and styles to both tactics. You can have a good manager that cares for you and that you enjoy working with. There's nothing wrong with that. You can also have a leader who is leading in all the right ways, but is leading in the wrong direction. Elita from the comics is a prime example of a leader who's gone too far off the deep end. Her desperation has overtaken her moral compass. She fights for her people and does all that she can to save those on the battlefield. All great qualities of a leader. But the years of warfare and loss have brought her to an ultimatum, to trade the lives of the innocent for the lives of her own people. Now, Elita in Transformers 1 does not go on this journey through hell as her comic counterpart does, but she is placed into a scenario where she must shed her beliefs in order to grow into something more. If we do get the sequel that Transformers 1 deserves, then I'm not sure if this is the approach they will take with Elita. I think that the possible trilogy we hope for really is centered around Optimus and Megatron's relationship, and so Elita's descent into moral ambiguity may not fit into that overall storyline. I do think, however, that if we see Elita again, there will be a rift between her and Optimus. Not because she still holds a grudge against him, but simply because the two are so different. Optimus leads with humility, while Elita leads with force. Two leadership styles that can work effectively when needed, but are also usually at odds. My hope for Transformers 2 is that all the characters we have come to know and love continue to grow. Optimus still has a long way to go to become the Prime that we know him as in our hearts, and Elita still needs to undergo some major character arc to fully flesh out her place in the story. And that brings us to how she was portrayed on the big screen. If you saw my review for the film that I did with my wife, first, thank you for watching that. Secondly, you probably recall me saying that Scarlett Johansson was my least favorite performance of the entire film. Not because she did a bad job, but simply because everyone else was so much more convincing. Now, I will be honest, this is partially because when it came to the promotion of the film, Johansson was somewhat absent in the early months of trailers and promos. For the most part, we saw Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, and Keegan-Michael Key in the trailers and short-form ads. And so, for me, Johansson was somewhat out of mind when the film came out, meaning that going into it, I was already a bit down on her performance, which is not fair at all, I need to say that. I'm not suggesting that Johansson was too good to promote the film, as she does appear in later ads. I'm sure she was just very busy with her schedule when those promos were shot. And also, as I said in my celebrity casting video, without foolproof confirmation, we just don't know for sure. We can make educated guesses, but I cannot stand it when I see other people say that she didn't do promos for the film earlier in its life cycle because she was, quote-unquote, better than that. We don't actually know that, so please stop saying that. After rewatching the film 100 times, I've come to enjoy Johansson's performance a lot more, so much so that I hate to call it the weakest of the bunch. But I do think that for the most part, the other three main characters bring a little more to the table. But in no way does that mean that Johansson is phoning it in. No one in this movie sounds like they did a poor job. Were they all as invested in the franchise as director Josh Cooley was? Probably not, but they are professionals just the same. And so it's kind of their job to care about what roles they take and how well they perform in said roles. Now again, not every actor thinks this way, but from what we hear from the film, to me at least, it doesn't seem like anyone was phoning it in. So Johansson did a great job with the character, bringing her hard-working attitude and smug demeanor to life. And this does wonders for the character, evolving her from essentially a glorified love interest into something much better.
This blind optimism that you have is why you make such bold and courageous choices.
It was important that Elita-1 was not just a side character or somebody that leaned into the frame and said something funny. I really wanted her character to affect the story in a major way, and Orion can only become Optimus with her support and with her guidance, and that was something that I talked about with Scarlett, and she really loved, and Chris loved it as well, and it was like, let's make this a real group effort.
Generation 1 of Transformers is and always will be used as the comparison for every aspect of the franchise. It is the beginning, the foundations, the core of all that we know. Even when a new character is created, someone is able to compare it to some aspect from Generation 1. But that being said, that does not mean that Generation 1 is always the gold standard. Now hold on, put your pitchforks away and let me explain. In Generation 1, Elita is not much of a character. She really only exists to be Optimus's love interest. And there's nothing wrong with the character used in this regard, but she lacks any depth of character beyond that aspect. If you're not aware, there is something called the Bechdel test. It's a way to measure female representation in filmmaking. Before we go any further, and you get your pitchforks out again, this test is not perfect. And there are lots of issues that can be brought up with how it does simplify media to almost a pointless degree, but let's just use it at face value and not worry about the limitations of it. After all, this is just a Transformers channel, and I'm not that smart. The Bechdel test works as follows. To succeed the test, a piece of media must have at least two female characters speak to each other about something other than a man. So again, let's just use this at face value and see if Generation 1 Elita passes this test. And well, At least in her debut episode of War Dawn, she does not pass this test at all. Later in the show, she does appear alongside other female characters, which is great, but she still primarily is used as Optimus's love interest. Okay, so what is my point here? Elita cannot be a love interest for Optimus? No. Elita is a horrible example of female representation? No, not that either. I'm simply pointing out that in her limited origins, she is most well-defined and remembered for being Optimus's long-lost girlfriend. And that aspect of her is not very fleshed out. I do actually enjoy the idea of Optimus having an old flame that has since either died out or she's just been absent for a millennia due to the war. But even with that being said, giving Elita her own character and motives is far more interesting than simply tying her usefulness to Optimus alone. The IDW comics actually did this by entirely separating her from Prime. The War for Cybertron trilogy did a good job at making sure she wasn't just the pink girl Autobot that Optimus likes a lot. And Transformers 1 does an amazing job linking Elita and Optimus' story together without making it simply a love interest. I do think there is room in the story for these two to grow closer together romantically, but I'm happy that their origins had them separate from each other at the start. I think it's much more meaningful and impactful to see Elita learn from Orion, who is objectively the less experienced bot in the equation. By all means, Elita is more powerful than Orion at the start of the film, but as we learn inadvertently from Megatron, it's not actually just the might of one bot that matters. It's the spark behind that bot that can make a difference. Pure strength is a valuable asset, but how and when to use it is even more powerful. Managing subordinates and telling them what to do can only get you so far. So to truly succeed in the world, you need to grow and become a leader, one who respects their own team and knows when to use force and when to use humility.